Well, wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Again, my name is Lacy Wolter. I am a BCBA and Director of Training for Lighthouse Autism Center. Today, we're going to go over a little bit about autism, what it is, what it isn't, what we've ruled out, what we know about it, what we're still learning, and then most importantly, how you can apply this information to your day-to-day life. So again, this is where I encourage participation because we're going to go through some information that you may know, some information you may learn new today. But I think the biggest takeaway that we find in these trainings is what you're going to use this information for. And so I encourage participation throughout so that you can make this information as applicable as possible within your field. Alrighty, so what is autism? As we've discussed, is according to the CDC, autism is a developmental disability which causes social impairments, communication deficits, and behavioral challenges. Again, according to the CDC, it's a spectrum disorder. One thing that we say in the field a lot of the time is once you've met one person on the spectrum or with autism, you've met one person with autism or on the spectrum. Many of those who are more advanced in skill sets than others, and others have different deficits. You'll notice a lot of different skill deficit gaps, so where they may feel advanced or you may notice advancement in one area, but there's idiosyncrasies that they're unable to complete within that skill set that are that create barriers. It doesn't matter if it's different or anything like that, because humans are meant to be different. We're all different in some way, but the key takeaway there is that their quality of life is impacted because they're unable to access the reinforcement that we're all able to access through the different human behavioral idiosyncrasies that we learn throughout our life. They could have independent skills in one area, but not another. That goes back into relating to the gap skills that we're talking about. Again, you have that advancement in a skill set, but there may, in a task analysis, think about brushing your teeth. Yeah, they may be able to brush their teeth amazingly, but they go to the dentist and there's one tooth or one aspect that they're missing because their fine motor or their gross motor in that aspect is lacking due to their autism. Not all of ASD cases are the same. Again, we've touched on that. We have a saying within our field of once you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And that's very important to the field as we grow as well, because what's really cool is that we are a younger science. And when I say younger science, I say like 60s and 70s. Okay, so again, we have some girth behind us and some years behind us, but again, not as much as, maybe some different, biomedical science, we'll say. And so we're a younger field of science. And so we're now seeing the kids that we worked with when we were a young birthing science, and they're adults now and they have voices. And so we're learning of these people that went through our, first, second, third, fourth round of development in our scientific process. And they're giving us back their voice and saying, I appreciate this about the field and I don't appreciate this about the field. And so really what we're learning now is that with the growing autistic voice, really, even more than we said so before, no two cases are the same. No two individuals are the same. There may be some commonalities and some things that align two different people, but there's not ever going to be two exact same cases. And then now ASD diagnosis now includes other conditions that were previously diagnosed separately. We all know about the DSM, hopefully. And so the DSM-4, the difference between the DSM-4 and the DSM-5 is that pervasive development disorder, not otherwise specified, was added. So PDD and OS was added. And then Asperger's syndrome was taken away of its own diagnosis and built into the autism ASD diagnosis. We know that there are different levels. So basically, as we've said, there's different severities and it is a spectrum. So it's a sliding scale of where you're going to land on that spectrum. And then let's get into some basic facts. According to the CDC, again, we're going to use the CDC here because that is our governing for information. Occurs across all socioeconomic race and ethnic groups. We're not targeting any one person here. 4 times more common in boys than it is girls. Now I'm going to stop there. I'm going to point out this and not necessarily because I just said that we don't necessarily target any one person. Now the second fact here says, well, okay, Lacy, you're wrong there. It seemed to target boys more than girls, but I'm going to throw a little bit of a challenge out here that maybe we just don't have enough research. What we know now is that it presents differently in girls. The classic information of what we know is more easily identifiable and diagnosable within boys because it goes against the general neurotypical characteristics of what child development is. Girls typically have higher rates of excused shyness or decreased social communication, and that's lumped into being shy or being introverted or things like that. So all these internal behaviors or these characteristics that are lumped in with females as a gender may sway, and I'm not saying entirely, but may sway that statistic there. 1 in 36 children diagnosed in the US. And that statistic grows and depends on where you get your information from. So this little statistic here is some way where I like to impart and say, make sure you're validating where you get your information from. Does not statistically affect life expectancy outside of the mental barriers that, the mental health barriers that autism may propose itself with. Autism itself is not causing any kind of health expectancy variability in that sense. It cannot be diagnosed by blood or medical testing. And I will say here, as a science, we're coming even further at that. AI generation and different scientific advancements are helping us to identify different neurological triggers and identifiers within the brain that could help us identify and narrow in onto those identifiers earlier on, which, going back to the difference in diagnosis between genders, could really be an advancement for that idiosyncrasy there. And the last thing is diagnosis comes from observation and review of behavior and development. So this is going over a series of years, and there are a series of assessments done by different medical professionals, but there are a couple assessments that are done in the autism community to diagnose specifically autism and be able to access treatment within that. Any questions so far before I get into kind of the possible causes of autism, what we've ruled out of what causes autism? So basically anything that we've gone over so far, what is autism and the basic facts of what we know according to the CDC.
I have a question of, can you get diagnosed with autism at a later stage in life, like when you're maybe in your late 20s or early 30s?
Yes, adult diagnosis is becoming more and more common. Again, especially for those women that were overpassed in the younger years of our field. A lot of adult women are now seeking out that adult observation and diagnostic procedure to be able to access the different resources available to them, or even to just have that peace of mind of saying, even the label. I mean, honestly, folks, I'm going to tell you, this is the one label, and I'm going to segue a little bit here, and I know we're recording, so I'll probably edit this out. But I get really geeked about this field because it's a diagnosis that is actually empowering for people. It gives them a reason to say, this is the way I am, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just my autism. This is how I am, and please understand me more and give me some grace and help me grow. Great question. If there are no further questions, I will go ahead and go further. So what causes autism? Again, this is widely debated within our field. So we don't really know. What we do know is, or possible causes, there could be genetic vulnerability. And again, with the advancements in AI and in neurological research and biomedical research, we're getting closer to answering that, but we don't have an answer yet. Possibility of environmental influence. Yeah, there's always a possibility of that environment, that goes back to the age-old discussion of nature versus nurture. Is this genetic or is this nurtured? And we don't have an answer to that right now, obviously, as scientists. So what we do know, and what's really cool for the AI generation, is that there are structural differences in the brain of those diagnosed with autism and those that are not. So now we're able to take those comparative studies and look at what potentially are causing those differences, and are we able to use AI to leverage and predict those differences earlier on in either the gestation process or in the birth to diagnostic process. What we've ruled out by research, the cold mother theory. If your mom was mean to you, or your mom is mean to you, or not attentive, or not loving, or not supportive in any way, it does not correlate with autism symptoms or diagnostics. Smoking, whether secondhand or firsthand, does not cause or correlate with the autism diagnostics. And then childhood vaccinations. I will go on a soapbox here just because this has been a problem since I was a young child in the field. But basically, there was a falsified study that was published in England. And since then, it claimed that and proved that vaccinations correlated with autism diagnostics and further barriers. That study was later debunked as fraudulent and false. There is no actual studies with basis to back that up. And so as the information we have right now is that there is no correlating evidence over time to show that vaccinations have any correlation with causing autism. All right, so we're going to go into what autism might look like. And so I'm going to reference back to what I said in the beginning. Once you've met one individual with autism or one autistic person, which is how the field kind of likes to be portrayed, now that we've heard from them, they prefer the label first. So what might someone with autism or an autistic person look like if you encounter them? And so let's dive into that. Not responding to name or minimal responding to name. So oftentimes we go down hearing deficit routes because of this, because they're not appropriately responding to their name, or they're ignoring you. No or minimal eye contact, minimal communication, whether that be verbal or gestural. They might use augmented communication devices, whether that be pictorial communication exchange system or an augmented version of that. They might use an electronic communication system, whether that be an iPad with a software loaded onto it like Proloku or something in that sense. And that might differ if you are not typically presented with that. It's definitely, you have to present more time with communication, more processing with communication, and also you're being presented with a novel experience that you may not have encountered before, whether that be a application for speech or a picture exchange communication system. Minimal socialization with others or interest in doing so, and then difficulty reading and using appropriate facial expressions. And so what I like to do right now is kind of pause and think about what autism might look like in your environment. And how like these things might all together, because singularly, we all engage in these behaviors at some point or another. And I'm even going to say the augmented communication, we've done that. Think of a time when you're so angry and heightened that verbal communication is no longer appropriate. And you now have to just go with something gestural, of whether it be back away from me or stop or no, I need a minute. Think about times you're redirecting your own children. How many times you're using sign language. My favorite sign language that is appropriate for kids is no. It's not my favorite word. I love yes. But it's a real fun and satisfying sign language to use. So even that is something that we've all personally encountered. So that I say that because it gives us a little bit of a bridge to relate to the people on the spectrum. We've all been or experienced some form of what they're experiencing, just maybe not all combined together. So not responding to name, no or minimal eye contact, limited verbal communication. In your environment, this is Kidsium, yes. And so you are getting people, and I use the teachers version of this because I see a lot of you as educators. I brought my kids to Kidsium, and I very much appreciate all of the things that you bring to the table and the education you are providing and the guidance and support to parents you are providing. Because even though I'm a BCBA, when I put my parent hat on, I'm no longer a BCBA. It seems like all of my knowledge goes out the window, and I'm reliant on service professionals like you to guide me through maybe different barriers in an environment that you've created and are designated to support and grow. So if you have a child that's coming in that's not responding to their name, that has minimal or no eye contact, has limited communication, what barriers might that present, even in a typical situation? Say hypothetically you're in an exhibit and it's a pop-up exhibit and there are people in line and you have someone that might be just frozen, and you have a parent who is identified, hey, this is someone that's on the spectrum. I don't know what to do. I'm embarrassed. I'm overwhelmed. And you go in and you say, okay, I'm going to try and pair and rally this kid through this, but you're unable to because they're not responding to their name. They're not responding to your directives. They're not communicating with you. You're not making eye contact. So you're not feeling that typical personal communication and attachment. They're not socializing with others, so they're not following those generalized rules that you expect other kids to follow. They're not following social and appropriate use of behavior because they're not following their peers. And so you now have a very unique situation to go in and target. And if you don't target it appropriately, then you could potentially escalate the situation, because unfortunately, a lot of the time when we approach individuals with autism, there is so much going on internally that we're not processing, that we only respond to the external events, which is everything I've just described right now. And so educating yourself on this, I want to commend you for educating yourself on this, because the more you know about this, the more you can start to understand what's going on internally and be able to look past what autism might look like and say, okay, what is the goal for this individual and how can I get them there? So I'm going to go into a little bit more of what autism might look like. Engaging in repetitive movements or behaviors. We've known that one. That one's like very classic autism. If you watch any cinematic adventure with that displays autism, you're definitely going to get some sort of hand flapping, maybe even some sort of savant like A Beautiful Mind, where you can count toothpicks as soon as they drop on the floor, or anything like that. Limited or fixated interest. Trains are the big one. That is stereotypical. Again, when I say stereotypical, every autistic person is different. And so when I say stereotypical, it is just the things that Hollywood or, things that are just commonly known. And it's not bad. It's just, that is a way of getting information out there and making autism a little bit more accessible and knowledgeable to the common layperson. They may have delayed speech or atypical speech patterns, may have difficulty with articulation, does not engage or struggles to engage with social exchanges, difficulty functioning with others or with routines, and difficulty following instructions, expressive language deficits such as expressing feelings. And now I'm going to throw in there, I was just at a conference, and one thing there was a talk presented by an autistic person, and one thing she brought up is an under discussed thing in the field is sensory processing disorder. And so what autism might look like is that you might have they're getting all of these sensory inputs and they're processing things on a longer timeline than what an average person takes to process. And a biggest example of this that I found impactful during that talk from that autistic person was that she said, if I'm in a conversation in a group of people, and this I think applies to the scenario that we've just created here with a pop-up exhibit and an individual that's having a difficult time, unable to follow rules and regulations, unable to follow the social patterns of behavior of everyone else, not following instructions, not responding, almost shutting down inwardly, and what we might classify as a refusal or as just a literal shutdown. And that might be a part of sensory processing delay. And so what she did was she talked about, if you're in a group of people and we're having a conversation, and even in this talk, I've said I'm a fast-paced talker, but we're all able to keep up with it. Otherwise, I assume that you would stop me and say, Lacy, slow down, because I gave you permission to do so at the beginning. But if you're in a group of people and you have autism or you have sensory processing disorder, then the communication might progress faster than what you're able to keep up with. So by the time you formulated your contribution or able to kind of process what just happened, the conversation have moved on at least 1 to 3 topics. And so what you'll get a lot of the time is those autistic people refraining from the social conversations or social atmospheres because they're not keeping up with it. They're not able to keep up with it, and that impacts their quality of life overall, which again, I want to commend you for coming to this training, because you're going to battle that now. You're going to be able to notice these things and these slight little behaviors, and you're going to put them all together, and you're going to say, maybe this person is on the spectrum, maybe not, but maybe this person is on the spectrum and could value or could benefit from a different lens of how I'm going to approach this. So before we move on to, because I've said this before, I've said this recently, is that your response to this is important to know, because your response can escalate or de-escalate a situation. If someone is already withdrawing and going into refusal and shutting down, and you go in and you try to get them to respond like any other neurotypical responding human being, then there is a chance that you could add to their sensory overload, add to whatever deficit or barrier they're experiencing, and cause them to react and respond bigger, which again is human behavior. That is not classic to their autism, right? We all respond bigger. The coping skills and the coping strategies and the learning of that is maybe specific to their autism, but we all deal with being able to implement the appropriate coping strategies and be able to respond appropriately to aversive or non-preferred stimuli. This is a barrier that is classic to autism. They may not have the ability to learn those coping skills the way that we all do through social interactions. They might need those intentional teaching moments to say, and they need, and what we're learning now is it's not only intentional, it is informed, it is compassionate. We're going in with not a directive and saying, I need you to do this and you're going to follow through. We're going in and saying, this is hard. And I see why this is hard for you. And I want to help you through that. How can we do that? I am educated on what barriers you might be experiencing. And I'm going to take the moment to just observe, slow things down for you, and hopefully make a positive impact. All right, so I'm going to pause here and ask for questions, comments, concerns on what we went through on what autism might look like. Have there been any experiences that you've encountered where, yes, now that I've labeled all these together, you've now had a little moment of, oh my gosh, I've experienced this before, and I would love to share this right now. Also gives me a time to take a sip, so. Okay.
I actually did have something to say.
Wonderful. Yes.
So, so what you said, what autism might look like. In the beginning, you said that it's not all the same. There's not two that are exactly alike. Do some of those things of what they might look like also like the opposite of what they are? Should we be looking like if someone is overly, I don't know, talking or just being a little excessive, should we look at those symptoms as well?
So smart. What a great question. And yes, go back into the beginning when I said that in the DSM, we just vamped everything a couple years ago. So diagnoses are lumped in that were previously separate. And often what comes with autism are comorbid diagnoses. I can't think of a historical client that I've had that really has only been diagnosed with autism. A lot of the time they have speech delays, sensory processing disorder. Like I've mentioned, they have ADHD diagnosis. They have all of these different behavioral or neurological or physiological diagnoses that also impact or exacerbate the conditions of autism. Perfect question, yes. And don't be overwhelmed by that information, because I understand now that my answer to you is likely overwhelming because, well, it kind of decredits what you're learning about autism here, because now you've just opened up all the other things you need to know or not know as well. But if you keep in mind that you're not, you only know what you can know. You don't know what you don't know. And you're taking the first step here and even asking that question subsequent to the knowledge you've received. Continue asking those questions, and that's what will help that response of having to know everything seems smaller, because the more you ask, the more answers you're going to get, and the more you're going to categorize things. So what does autism look like? What doesn't it look like? If it doesn't look like that, or it looks like this, what might it be as well? Thank you for that question. I hope that answers it and didn't overwhelm anybody.
It didn't. Thank you.
Perfect. Good. All right, I'll pause for a little bit longer. If there's anything else anybody wants to contribute, I'm here for it. All right. If I move too quickly, please feel free to interrupt, and we can certainly pivot back. You have an hour of my time, if not more. So feel free, let's make the most of this, right? So calming and de-escalating techniques. You now know the what and the why, and now I'm going to teach you kind of what to do with this information. You've labeled a situation that might need help. You've labeled an individual that might need help, but now what do you do and how do you provide that help in your situation and in your unique position? So remember, slow down and take your time. A lot of these times, especially in heightened situations, we tend to move too fast. We go into fight or flight mode, we go into crisis response mode, and our critical thinking skills suffer because of that. A lot of the time we respond habitually, and it may not be to the best of our benefit, because again, I'm going to go back, you don't know what you don't know. And until this information is fluent with you and you feel like you can utilize and recall this information and implement this information in those heightened opportunities, then this information is not generalized. So continue to practice this. And remember, always in your mind, if I need to take a second, it's okay. As long as everyone's safe, it's okay. It doesn't matter how embarrassing or loud a situation is. I can always augment the environment to make this experience better for whomever individuals are involved. Because remember, there's a lot of emotions that come with this, right? You usually have parents that are accompanying the children, or school teachers, some sort of caregiver guidance, and there's a lot of emotions that come along with any barriers with autistic or maladaptive behavior in public, right? There's embarrassment that comes along with that. And then there's a sense of heightened behavior that comes with that as well from the caregiver. They're wanting to respond more rapidly just to shut things down. And that's where it's important for you as an educated professional to come in and say, it's okay for me to take a breath. And remember that nothing is real, unless this is a crisis situation where someone's about to get hurt. I can slow everything down. I can take my time. I can think. I can look at every little variable that's happening around me. And I can say, I can address things systematically. The situation might be overwhelming for the individual. So I've talked about environmental modification. Think about, so like if you're in an exhibit that is new and there are strobing lights and there are lots of noise and stimulation, if there's flickering lights, or there's maybe like even, I'm thinking of, there was a firehouse exhibit that I went through, and there's, of course, it simulated a firehouse, right? There's a strobe light going on, there's an alarm going on, there's a simulated fire and smoke thing that you could go through. Talk about sensory overload, right? I am an adult, undiagnosed, and for being on the spectrum, but I was overwhelmed in that situation because not only am I attending to my children, I'm looking at all the different variables around me, trying to make sure I can control the environment as much to my capacity to keep everybody safe. But I'm also like looking and seeing what other teaching moments I can derive for my children from this, right? So I'm thinking as an educator, as a parent, as a safety official, I'm putting on every different hat. And so you really want to consider what might be going on in that environment that you can adjust without actually physically touching that individual. We go so quick to moving that individual and moving them from that environment to make them better. But what can we do to make them better in that current environment that doesn't impact everybody else? If it's possible, let the individual show you what they need. Keep in mind that sensory processing disorder. Things might take a little longer to respond, especially if people are overwhelmed and shutting down. Right? So if you go in and you say, hey, how can I help you? Keep in mind, they may not be responding. They may not be looking at you in the eye. You may be too close to them. And so they might go like this to you and push you away. There's a lot of things that can happen, but being aware and keeping your cool, knowing how to respond to each one of these and categorize these behaviors will help you in responding to these. So asking them to show you if they can't tell you, because again, we have a lot of communication barriers there in the spectrum, ask them to show you what's going on. And keep in mind that they might just show you with a quick dart of an eye contact, or like they might look at something, say a strobing light. And it's okay if you miss those things. Just remember to repeat those and give multiple opportunities for yourself to get that information if you miss it in a fleeting moment. And remember to just remain observant. You want to keep your unconscious bias in check. You want to make sure that you're continuing to remain calm and you're looking the environment and you're continuing to reassess, because whatever the answer might be in that one moment, everything changes with every variable that's presented. And so you might need to adjust your response in that to help that human being remain comfortable and safe in that moment. The biggest thing, family and friends, they might be overwhelmed, but you can help them refocus their energies to be a purposeful contribution to a moment. They know the person best. Your questions and the way you ask them and your demeanor will help refocus people. When you ask these family and friends, hey, I'm here to help. This is okay. What's going on? Tell me what you know. They're likely going to start with this and this and this and this and this and hyperspeech and in panicked demeanor. You have a chance right now to lean back into that and say, that's all right. We're going to slow this down. You're not inconveniencing anybody. This is okay. Let's learn from this. And so get that information, draw that quality information out from your caregivers, because again, if no one is getting hurt, every second counts. We've got time. Functions of behavior. I'm going to briefly go into this. This goes into our science a little bit of ABA in particular. We believe that every action, every behavior is indicative of a function of that behavior. We don't just act willy-nilly. We all do something to gain something or escape something. And sometimes those functions are overlapping. So our four main ones, and I'm going to teach you about our four main ones. And I'm going to throw a fifth one in there that is not empirically supported at this moment, but we are moving in that direction. And I think we'll all agree. So the first four, access to tangibles. We all want something. If I'm hungry and I'm crying, I want food. I'm crying, then someone delivers me food. I stop crying after I eat because now that internal hunger behavior is gone. Okay, I was crying because I was hungry. It went away after I got access to that tangible of food. Okay, escape. I can use the same example. I'm crying because I'm hungry and I don't like that feeling, that empty stomach internal behavior, and I want to escape that hunger feeling. So I'm going to cry and I'm going to get that food. Or let's use a good behavior because we all talk about the bad behavior. I'm going to ask for food. That's my good behavior here. I'm going to say, give me food. I want food. And that is going to help me escape my hunger. So automatic or sensory. So I'm going to use the same example as well. Maybe I'm not, maybe I'm engaging in different sensory, like maybe I'm going like this. Well, motor play because my tummy is empty. I'm hungry and I don't like that feeling. But when I twist my tummy like this, I feel tons better. And so I'm going to continue to do this because I feel better. That's automatic reinforcement, right? This is not something that anybody controls. This is something that I control. I can take away, I can stop. Someone could control it. It's bad. Please don't do it. Don't stop sensory seeking behaviors. It is a regulatory behavior. And unless they are unsafe, I implore you not to stop them. They are regulatory. So just like in my example, I'm doing this to avoid my hunger pain. I'm regulating my hunger pain so I can escape that, correct? So you can see as I'm going through this, functions are hard to tease apart, and we don't expect anybody to be an expert in it. Because oftentimes, as you can tell, even in my same example, you can define different functions of behavior. Whatever behavior I'm doing, you can define it by the different functions of behavior based on what I'm trying to escape or gain access to, right? And then the last one is attention, and we're all familiar with this. Kid cries. We'll use the firehouse example. The kid's crying and mom goes in. Oh no, honey, what's wrong? Let me take you out of here. I'm okay. You're okay. Hi, how are you? I love you. Or opposite, stop that right now. You need to do this. And that's super fun for the individual. They are super used to that redirective kind of parenting style, and that's what they're used to, and so that's the kind of love and affection they seek out, and so they're engaging in this behavior to gain attention. Now I mentioned that I'm going to throw a fifth one out there on you, and I will still, and that one is control. As a field in behavior analysis, we're looking at control as a maintaining variable for behavior. We all have a sense and a need for control, and we all engage in sometimes odd behavior if that control is taken in a different area of our life. Oftentimes we'll pivot and we'll try and gain or exert control in different areas of our life to supplement that. And so we're looking at control as being a contributing factor as well. Now, in this spiel, I have gone into kind of the different idiosyncrasies and knowing the different functions of behavior. And I've also talked about kind of how complicated and kind of muddy that can get. And so I'm going to simplify it for you a little bit here. Again, just like taking that time to slow down and assess the situation, asking questions can help. Show me what you want. I don't need you to be an expert on functions of behavior to go through and be able to provide and turn a behavior off or turn a behavior on if you need. Basically, the science behind that is saying I can turn a behavior on or off by giving them or taking away, by allowing them to escape or giving them access to a regulating skill or access to a tangible item, or access to attention, giving them some form of attention. I can turn a behavior on or off because of that. So that's the takeaway I want you guys to take with that. Remember those 5 really, key words, and think about how that might impact your day-to-day and how might knowing why people engage in these behaviors might help you in a heightened situation. Calm, neutral tones can assist in avoiding further escalation. It might be, especially when talking to parents, we've talked about that, it might be easy to go in, and it's natural to go into heightened tones, to go into rapid speech. But if you can be the model, if you can be the stand that everybody needs to remain calm, then you will be a great asset to that autistic person or individual who is struggling, whomever it is. If you can be their strong voice of reason in that moment and keep everybody calm and get everybody to a successful outcome, that is your goal here. So visuals may be beneficial. This is a proactive strategy that your organization could build in ahead of time. Having visuals for communication barriers, whether that be thinking of your 4 functions, escape, whether you need to get someone out of a situation because something is just bad. Whether they want to access something, some tangible item, whether they want their blankie, their lovey item, or they need some sort of tangible item to help them regulate whatever they need in that moment. Whether they need to access something internally or some sort of sensory movement to be able to get rid of that internal feeling. Or do they need some attention? And that might just be your compassionate attention. And that compassionate attention of going in and saying, I'm here for you. Everyone else is freaking out. I'm here for you. What can we do? And then being aware of your body language helps a lot. We talk about this a lot in crisis prevention and response to crisis. If you're standing up with arms crossed and you're creating like this authoritative pose, then to someone with autism, that might really be a trigger, especially someone that might have PTSD. A lot of the time, that's a diagnosis we see comorbid with autism. They have unfortunate circumstances that they've been subjected to, not only within, therapy, but within their home life. And so your stance and your tone could have a bigger impact on these learners than you have awareness of. And so being aware of these things can greatly change your outcome in a heightened situation. Going further, we're not going to go ahead and immediately touch. Again, we're going to talk about these potential sensory defensiveness that our people on the spectrum might have. If you touch them, it might feel differently. Even the lightest touch might be painful. And that doesn't mean it's painful all the time. The caregivers might tell you, no, they're fine with touch normally, but when they're heightened, a touch feels like 1,000 needles. And so it's good for you to be aware of that. And you may not be aware of that immediately, but you may be aware of that by, again, talking to caregivers and then responding to behavior as it happens. If you make a mistake in that moment, hypothetically, you touch them and they respond aversively, that's okay. You don't have to continue touching them. You don't even have to apologize. You can just say, oop, oop, and I won't touch you anymore in your head. You can just go, oop, or you don't even have to say anything at all. You've just learned based on that response that maybe you shouldn't touch them, and that's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. You responded appropriately, but you've learned something based on their behavior that you're going to now augment your behavior on. Do not stop stereopathy. We've talked about this. It's a regulating thing. That's a big thing in the ABA field. In the past, we have stopped stereopathy. It's something that we all apologize for. It is something that really should not be done unless it's dangerous. It is a calming technique and honestly something we all engage in. If you've ever clicked a pen or you've ever shaken your leg or you've ever, I don't know, I ask you just right now to reflect on anything sensory processing that you do to regulate anything in a heightened moment or an uncomfortable or an anxious moment, a sad moment, anything that is differing from your typical moment, and think about your regulating techniques that you impose upon yourself and what your response would be if someone were to stop them. You would escalate, I would assume, because that's a coping strategy for you. Speak in short, simple phrases. I'm going to stop here and I'm going to pause and I'm going to say, please don't treat anybody like they're simple. The point in this is to speak in short, simple phrases as to not get lost in all of the words that you're giving, all of the directives. Again, there might be some sort of sensory processing delay that is now exacerbated because of all of the different environmental contributions or whatever is going on. Things are likely to be heightened. So use your judgment in that. If you can speak to them like a human being, but use short, simple phrases just to make things simple, go for it. But I don't implore you to speak to them in baby tones and talk to them as if they're demeaned by any means. Allow them to take their time. Individuals with ASD process things differently, especially when heightened. We've talked about this. This is kind of a soapbox for me if you can't tell. Allow them to collect themselves if needed. And again, you might, in that moment, your responsibility might be to the external environment. Your responsibility to that moment and to that individual and to your position might be to control the external variables. What can you do in the environment that is least restrictive to help this individual? Can you calm parents down? Can you calm other responders down? Can you clear out anybody else like normally? Hey, can we redirect a couple kids over here naturally and have them go engage in a different exhibit while I calm this down? What resources can we get together to make this person more comfortable? Do not assume the person knows or does not understand what you're saying. This goes back into those short, simple phrases. Again, we don't want to treat anybody like they're simple or they're less than. We also don't want to assume that they're understanding everything we're saying or adversely what they're not understanding. Just because and this goes back to the symptoms of autism, just because they're not responding through the name, they're not responding like a typical developing child or individual would, doesn't mean that they're not conjugating or understanding what you're saying. And just because they're not responding immediately doesn't mean they're not conjugating or understanding what you're saying. They may take some time to process that, and then their expression of their understanding may and likely will look different than things you've encountered in the past. But the more you know about this and the more you familiarize yourself with autism and related disorders, the more you will be able to react appropriately. And this will become fluent nature to you. Okay, and then my last thing is, it's okay if your initial strategy doesn't work out. You can always try new approaches. I said this previously, if you've done something and it causes something bad to happen, just stop it. Don't apologize later. Apologize if you need to, if you did something bad, but don't take away from the moment. This isn't about you, this is about the individual, right? And a lot of the time we go to just apologize and let people know that I'm sorry for what I've done. But again, if it takes away from that individual at the moment, just stop what you're doing, refocus, and get people there. Apologize later. And it's okay. This isn't something like we're not all supposed to know things. This is trial and error. That's why we're all putting our scientific hats on, because we're taking what we know and we're responding to all of these different behaviors and these human beings with different. How many times? I think idiosyncrasies I've said at least 20 times during this presentation. So if you're tallying that, let me know at the end how many times I've said it. And keep bonus points if I used it appropriately or inappropriately in context. But basically, my point there is that we just need to tailor our responses to that individual. And you're in a unique position because you don't get the chance all the time to get to know these individuals intimately. And so you're flying by the seat of your pants. So again, the more you practice these things, the more you pick a nugget. I challenge you to pick a little nugget of information you've learned throughout this talk and challenge yourself to label that. Even just label it as in your day-to-day. You see a child that's engaging in this, go through and say, okay, I'm going to see why are they engaging in this joyful behavior or potentially this maladaptive behavior? Why did they start crying all of a sudden? And how can I help? I'm going to move on to safety considerations then. So in escalated situations, safety should always be the forefront of our mind. And it's a question that we should always be asking. Every situation that presents it's new. Are people safe? Is someone going to get hurt? And is it intimate? Examples. So when assessing the situation, also assess for potential safety concerns. See what you're doing, what the individual is doing, what other people are doing. Are they darting their eyes to certain places? This is where you become kind of a minute observer of behavior. Are they averting their eyes somewhere? Are they looking at other children? Are they looking at their caregiver? Are they reaching for their caregiver? Are they, what is their behavior in that moment? And how can you augment the environment to minimize safety risks? Some examples of how you can do that is remain between the individual and outdoor exits in case of elopement. If you know someone might escape a situation, talking about those functions of behavior, if they want to quickly escape a situation, they might choose to dart and run away. And we are not always in safe environments to do so. And so one thing that you can proactively do is remain between the individual and an exit. And that doesn't mean that you're going to tackle them when they go for it. That means that you're going to give yourself some grace and some time to make a smart, reasonable decision to redirect or say, stop, wait, and pause that moment before something dangerous does happen. Consider increased space between you and others in case aggression occurs. Now that goes back into what, accidentally you got too close or you touched the individual and they went back and pushed you or said, no, get away. My neurotypical 3-year-old son does that. That happens, I feel, for anybody. If you're heightened, especially if your prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped, as most children, or as all children's are, then you don't have those reasoning skills to be able to respond appropriately in all situations. Move heavier breakable objects. This is the biggest thing in the world, right? Environmental augmentation is the biggest benefit that you can do, because you delay having to touch that child, right? And if you can get them to de-escalate without having to escalate further, then that's always the goal. So if even if you don't know that child, proactively, you might want to either put some distance in between heavier breakable items or remove them altogether. Always be prepared. You want to call for backup if you need. So that doesn't mean that makes you a proficient professional. I'm going to tell you that right now. Calling for backup doesn't mean that you can't do anything. It means that you are really caring about that individual, and you put your personal bias and your personal ego aside, and you're going to say, I need help in this moment. I am not equipped to do this by myself safely. And I want to use the team of professionals that are around me, and I want to use the family to communicate and help as well. So that means that as a guiding force in this, I'm going to remain calm. I'm going to know that I need to guide everybody in the situation to a positive outcome. Sometimes multiple minds are better than one. Others might notice things that you don't. So I've labeled some kind of overwhelming things to do in a heightened situation, and all at once, right? We're responding to a crisis here. And it's a honed skill. You don't just this is not a typical natural ability to go in and calm down everything, slow everything down, see it in slow motion, and then be able to direct everybody what to do while keeping in mind of a diagnosis, keeping in mind of ever-changing variables and environments and people and emotions and internal behavior and external behavior, and then also be able to guide everybody to do what they need to do. That is a learned skill, and this is step one. So thank you again for being here. Enlist your team to help you with that. Everybody here who is attending this training now has the same information that you do. I encourage and challenge you to do exercises together. When you're in situations, have a safety word or a code word to recall some of this information. ASD 101, what are we going to do? And to enlist your team members and to enlist those family members, because you are a group of support people for this individual, and you have a set of skills that you can implore, or you can forget about and respond like a typical human being and potentially escalate the situation. Being proactive can avoid escalation. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk on this. I probably sound a little preachy when I've just noticed I probably sound extremely preachy when I'm saying this. And I don't intend to be. I hope I sound inspirational rather than like shoving knowledge down your throat and like, do this instead of this. But it is important, I will say. I hope you can see that, knowing and knowledge is the separation between a crisis, escalating and de-escalating. So I hope you utilize this information, and I hope you have questions that can help you utilize this information. So examples of being proactive is having visuals ready. We talked about that. Having basic communications icons, having escape for those 4 functions of behavior. What is like an omnibus or a generalized man, a generalized ask that I can give people to escape something, to access something? What do we need to give people? And how can I give that to them with just one simple thing, whether that be a visual, and maybe you have like a little backpack of ASD tools. Sensory kits are a big one that goes along with the backpack of tools. So we've talked about kind of sensory processing disorder, and we've talked about kind of the different sensory barriers that can come with being on the spectrum. There are a number of items that can help regulate, and in addition to those self-stimulatory behaviors. So the talk, I mentioned I went to a talk this last week where an autistic person was giving her perspective on ABA and autism and what it is like for her. And during the talk, she had a fidget spinner, and she brought it up. She goes, I know that these are stereotypical. I know that these, went through like a fad, but dang it, I use it because it helps me. It helps me regulate. So having that on hand might be kind of a buzzword or, a fad, but it is actually functional. There's a reason it's around. And then if a situation does become unsafe, remember that it is like to remain cool, calm, and collected. I'm going to go back to, you got a team of professionals around you, whether they know this information or do not know this information. The important thing is that now you have this information. You know how to respond in a heightened situation, and you have the power to guide other people to how to respond in that heightened situation. If you got to take a break, you got to take a break, and that's okay. Some helpful tips for how to do this is don't assume anything. We've talked about that. We don't know what's going on. There are different, we'll say the keyword term here is there are different idiosyncrasies that occur within all human beings, specifically autistic individuals. So what they may be engaging in might be indicative of a different message, okay? Ask family members and other providers questions. Use your team. You got it, use it. Take an interest in getting to know what they like and what they don't like. Pairing yourself will give you instructional control. Will give you that extra meaningful voice to make change with that individual. Words might be difficult, visuals might be easier to follow. So consider what visuals might be generalizable within your environment. What barriers have you commonly come across where just one simple visual of maybe go or stop might have de-escalated that situation immediately? Or even break, like I need a break. Break things down into simple steps. And remember, don't assume and dehumanize people. We want to make sure we're talking to people with respect and assuming that everybody has the same education and knowledge as everyone else. We don't want to belittle people, but we do want to take time to break things down into simpler things if needed so that it can be, especially in heightened moments. Our critical thinking skills and our reasoning skills are already, as human beings, decreased in heightened moments. And so breaking things down into simpler steps is only a benefit to a basic human being in that moment. Have appropriate expectations. So remember, this population in particular may need additional support. We've talked about those gap skills. They might be expressing all of these skills and even abundant or surpassing to their peer or age similar peers. They might be engaging in advanced behavior, but they might have little gaps, and so they might not have those coping skill strategies that their peers have. Even though if they're advanced, they might not have those communication in heightened moments. That ability to communicate in heightened moments. They might not have the ability to regulate internal behaviors when something is overwhelming to them. They might not have these self-advocacy skills to articulate of things are moving too fast for me, or I don't agree with that. I don't like it when people touch me, or it's too loud in here, or I don't want to do that. Remain calm and in a neutral tone regardless of the situation. Again, I've said that throughout this PowerPoint, but I will say that is, if anything you walk away with, is remember to take your time. Unless someone's going to get hurt, you do not have to respond with immediacy and panic. You can respond with thoughtfulness and have a specific approach that will help that individual get through that difficult moment. And then remain patient. These interactions may not always be easy. And I'm not just talking about that for that specific individual. I'm talking about for everyone around you. It's not easy for you. It surely isn't. It's not easy for that parent. We know that. It's not easy for the kids around them. It's not easy for the parents of kids around them. You might get complaints from other people. You might have other things that are coming in from different avenues. This is a dynamic situation you are dealing with. But I encourage you to persevere because it's not always easy. And at the end of the day, we're focused on that individual. We want to keep everyone safe, but at that individual, it's the hardest for them in that moment. I'd like to challenge you to consider, because there is so much internal behavior that is going on that we cannot see, and they are not able to articulate in that moment. And it's our job to take this information, this now uncommon knowledge, and help them through that, help them articulate what is inside that we need to make external. So applying what we've learned. How can we apply what we've learned today to improve our practice, to improve what we're doing as professionals? What do we need to continue to put on for a focus of growth? But in your opinion, how do you think you can apply today what you've learned? And if you want to lump in a personal story, please feel free to do so at this time.
We have like a sensory room. So that would be something for me to just remember that we have. So in case something like that happens on the weekend, especially when it's loud and busy in here, to utilize. And we have, even at the front desk, we have a sensory bin. So just remembering that we have that as well to help when something arises.
That's wonderful. Again, I think that goes to the uncommon knowledge. Remind yourself of these tips, tricks, and tools you now have in your toolbox. And that's perfect. Remember, you have a sensory room. I mean, what an asset. A lot of places do not have a sensory room. Perfect.
So I guess what I've learned today and what I hope to apply, not only to neurodivergent students, but I hope can be helpful to every student, regardless of background. And I think that I think that, there's practices that every kid could, definitely benefit from, getting to know them. What are their interests? How do they react in situations? I think that it's definitely beneficial, but also paying, attention to the differences in each kid and what makes them who they are, and definitely like being sensitive towards that as well is very important. I did have a question, not really a story, but more of a question. I do know that, especially with a lot of African-American kids, a lot of the environments that many African-American kids are socialized in do very much like promote like talking over each other or like hyperactivity and, things like that. So I just kind of wonder like where I guess that line is between identifying what could be neurodivergence and what could just be someone growing up in their environment.
Thank you for bringing up cultural considerations. That's extremely, it is an extremely diverse topic within our field and a growing topic. And it's people like you that need to continue asking these questions, right? Because it's a very good question. What are we doing to mitigate the cultural differences within the populations that we serve? And that's where taking the time to ask questions and put aside your unconscious bias and I say unconscious bias because it's not our fault. These are things that have just formed in our brain over time and we are acting on them unconsciously. But what we can do to combat that is be aware of it. Be aware of our unconscious bias. Be aware of those human behaviors that we were reverting to based on what we think we know. Challenge ourselves to expand that rubber band a little bit. And we do that by asking and involving those caregivers. What is this like? Is this typical? What can I do? Because again, you're slowing down. You have time to ask that question. You have time to ask caregivers, what's going on from your perspective? What do you think needs to happen? And what do we do going forward? And now as a professional to address that question initially of now what do you do with that information? You've asked that caregiver. How do you set aside and critically think about what might be a cultural consideration versus what might be an autistic or diagnostic consideration, a developmental consideration, or just a human consideration as all. But I think I ended with it's a systemic change. That question is an overall systemic question that needs to happen over time and continually, and by all individuals to be able to address what is cultural and what is behavioral. Did that address your question and answer it?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Wonderful. The last question I'm going to come at you with is think of a time within, and I don't know your specific roles. I don't know your day-to-day duties. Think about your roles, your day-to-day. And I don't, if you don't want to contribute and talk verbally about this, but I at least asked you to walk away with this question and think about it. How can you apply this in your role? Think about a time that you've come across something that with this knowledge has now changed your response to that situation. Reflect on that, how it could have gone differently, and how are you going to adjust your behavior in the future so that you can impact the quality of life? Because that's what we're all here for, right? We're all here to make people feel great and comfortable and to grow and have learning opportunities and have the same experiences that everyone else has opportunities to have. And so what can you do with this knowledge to increase the quality of life of the individuals we serve?